A warm welcome from me to everyone to this final and third European GADSS webinar. And the title of this webinar is GADSS in Practice. So yesterday during webinar 1 and 2, we looked at standards and regulations, the overview of the GADSS, its functions. We also heard in the second webinar a number of companies presenting their GADSS products on aeronautical distress, autonomous distress tracking, and so forth, and how they are integrated in aircraft, also from a general aviation point of view. And today, by using a number of use cases, we are going to see how the GADSS will be used in practice. And of course, we hope that the GADSS will never be used, but if it has to be used, it should support search and rescue and timely recovery of flight data. So also for this first webinar, we have an excellent lineup of speakers. So I asked them to switch on their camera so that I can introduce everyone. We will start the series with Stephen Lett. Steve, can you please switch on your camera as well? Steve is the...
I think you've cut me off on the video. It says the host has cut off my video.
Jan? Is that...
No, normally not. Because I can only do that for all the panelists and not for one.
Okay. So there is...
Yeah.
So Jan, if Steve, if you can see on your side with the camera, it was switched on in a minute ago. But okay, we'll introduce you. Steve is the head of the Secretariat of COSPAS SARSAT. Now on screen. Very good to see you, Steve. He's head of the Secretariat since 10 years already. Formerly, Mr. Lett was deputy to the US ambassador coordinating communication policy at the US Department of State, and has been representative and delegation head of meetings in various UN and its agencies, ICAO, IMO, and the ITU. Philippe Plantin-Duc. Philippe, hello. We saw you already yesterday. Philippe works for the French BEA and has been participated in major international investigations involving 800 events. And he is currently chairing EUROCONTROL Working Group 89 on the next generation of ELT. Then Shane Patrick. Hi Shane, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Shane is General Manager Oceanic Services with the Irish Aviation Authority. He's responsible for the oversight of the strategic and tactical delivery of oceanic air traffic communication over the eastern part of the North Atlantic. And prior to that, he was served in the Royal Air Force. And Shane's team provides also the Ariane Alert Service, and that will be the subject of the presentation. And Ariane Alert is a free global emergency aircraft location service based on ADS-B data. And Ian Knowles, also yesterday we saw Ian, technical officer at ICAO, involved in flight operations, including supporting the flight ops panel. And before ICAO, he worked as a captain on the A320 for British Airways. So again, a very excellent lineup of speakers. Welcome everyone. Welcome also everyone that has joined the webinar. As Jan said, please post your questions on the Q&A, the content-related questions. I see some questions on availability of presentations and recordings. This webinar, like the previous webinars, are being recorded, and they will be available on the EUROCONTROL event site, as will be the presentations that you will see also during this and the previous webinar. So I hope that answers that question. Without further delaying the start, we go to Stephen Lett, to present the COMPAS-SARSAT system and its role in the GADSS. And COMPAS-SARSAT plays a key role, a central role in all emergency communication on a global basis. So Steve, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Hank. Good morning to those in North America, and good afternoon to those in Europe and anyone else around the world. You heard over the course of yesterday a lot of discussion that mentioned emergency locator transmitters, ELTs, and more particularly emergency locator transmitters for distress tracking, ELT-DTs. And you also heard about the collection of data for an aircraft in distress, in particular in the ICAO location of aircraft in distress repository, the latter. So somewhere between ELTs, ELT-DTs, and the latter is this thing called COSPAS-SARSAT. Hopefully most of you are familiar with it, but I'm not going to assume that everyone is familiar with it. So this is an important part of the presentation. As I mentioned to Hank at one point, it's like talking about GADSS without knowing what ICAO is. So it's important to know what COSPAS-SARSAT is. So quickly we'll cover three topics. One is our structure. The other is what are our current innovations, and finally, what is our alert data distribution arrangement. So talking about the structure and the system, first of all, who are we? Who is COSPAS-SARSAT? We are you. We are 45 governments and agencies that cooperate to collect distress beacon data and distribute it to search and rescue authorities around the world who can take action. We are not a UN agency, but we are organized like a UN agency. We're an intergovernmental cooperative, just like the UN. We're just not a UN agency. We were created by Canada, France, then Soviet Union, now the Russian Federation, and the United States. And as I mentioned, we have 41 other participant countries that add to the organization's efforts. With administrative costs shared by everyone. We are not a regulatory body. That is the role of other international organizations and national administrations, and we're not an operational SAR unit. We are a standards setting organization and a cooperation organization. So we deliver distress alerts all over the world to over 200 countries and territories. It doesn't matter whether or not they are members of the COSPAS-SARSAT program. Here is a map showing some of the alerts. The ones in yellow are from ELTs, so aviation alerts. As was mentioned yesterday, most aviation alerts, of course, are from general aviation aircraft, but these can also be from commercial aircraft. We are the only system that has, in essence, reverse GPS, the ability to trilaterate the location of a beacon, even if the beacon does not report its location from a navigation source such as GPS. And we are a cooperative of governments that delivers the alerts directly to SAR agencies. We have a government-operated ground data distribution network that delivers those alerts, usually by automatic means. We have a lot of cooperative relationships with UN agencies, other intergovernmental organizations, and non-governmental organizations, such as standard-setting organizations. I should mention here that in the middle of this group, we have Galileo that provides a large number of our spacecraft, and EUMETSAT, which provides a spacecraft to us as well. And of course, we work closely with European authorities such as EUROCONTROL and EASA. We have a very common intergovernmental organization structure. We have a council of the member governments that sets the policy. We have the secretariat, which I head, which aids in the execution of the policy. And the policy decisions mostly are derived from work of a thing called the Joint Committee, where we get operations experts and technical experts together to provide advice. We are a global system, historically proven. You can see how we have increased the number of people we've assisted to almost 3,000 in 1,200 incidents. And when you have a moment, you can enlarge the pie chart in the corner there and see that about 20% of those incidents are aviation related. So let's talk a little bit about the recent innovations of COSPA-SARSAT. The main one being MEOSAR, the Medium Altitude Earth Orbiting Search and Rescue Satellite System. It's composed of spacecraft from US GPS, European Galileo, Russian GLONASS, and China is offering to provide 6 additional spacecraft from its Beidou fleet. We use frequencies which are protected by the ITU for safety of life. So we have the highest level of protection in the ITU allocations. The MEOSAR system has been operational now for 4 years. So why is MEOSAR an improved system concept? Because if you look at the 6 LEOSAR satellites, the second line and the second arrow, you'll note that the footprint of a low Earth orbiting satellite is relatively small, which means that it only covers a portion of the Earth, a small portion of the Earth at the time. And in our case, we have 6 LEO satellites. So over time, they cover the entire Earth, but it does take some time to cover the entire Earth. MEOSAR, the top line, however, is a better concept because look how much larger the footprint is. It covers, I think, close to 1/3 of the Earth. And we have 42 spacecraft currently in operation and growing. So any point on the Earth sees multiple MEOSAR spacecraft at the same time due to the larger footprint. So the advantages are near instantaneous worldwide detection, and again, the ability to independently locate beacons. For first generation ELT-DTs, I will mention that we require a report of a navigation based location, but for all other beacons and for second generation ELT-DTs, we can also independently locate the beacon. Because of the number of satellites that are in view simultaneously, there is a significantly reduced effect of terrain or wreckage obstructions. We have obvious redundancy. We have the number of spacecraft I showed you earlier, 42 MEOSAR plus the 6 LEOSAR and I believe 10 GEOSAR satellites. And the system allows for new features such as return link service, which was briefly mentioned yesterday. And as I mentioned, redundant localization. So why are these things important? I'm going to give you an example from Egypt Air flight MS-804. We have heard about some ADT solutions that involve low Earth orbiting spacecraft. We'll hear about another one, I think, today. And these, in particular, relying on the Iridium spacecraft, have the advantage that they lay a breadcrumb trail, so you can track the aircraft during normal tracking as well as during distress tracking. But sometimes that's not adequate, and this isn't a case in point. You will see the 2 yellow pins which show the last 2 ADS-B reports from flight MS-804. And if one had drawn a straight line from those ADS-B reports, one would have been looking for the aircraft in the wrong place. I don't think we would have ever found that aircraft. However, shortly before the aircraft crashed, the ELT was activated, apparently manually from the cockpit. And we were able, through the MEOSAR system, to do post-processing. This is before the MEOSAR system was in operation, to locate the aircraft in the red ellipse that you see there. So I credit COSPA-SARSAT with providing the location information that allowed MS-804 to be located. and not just the COSPA-SARSAT system, but the MEO-SAR system in particular. So ELTs for distress tracking and GADSS compliance. As was mentioned yesterday, legacy ELTs were designed for post-crash alerting for survivable incidents. As mentioned at the bottom here, an ELT will still be required regardless of which ADT solution is selected, because it is still necessary to have the ability post-crash to locate the aircraft, including with homing at 121.5 megahertz. ELT-DTs are specified, of course, for in-flight tracking of aircraft in distress. So I'll go very quickly through this, but we support GADSS through improved alerting, including the ability to, with the number of satellites, avoid problems with damage or blockage, debris. We, of course, have activation upon detection of abnormal flight conditions. We have the return link capability, which allows for confirming the receipt of the alert, as well as remote activation, as was mentioned by the GADSS group yesterday. The ability for redundant position determination, and all of our work is specified for compliance with Annex 6 of ICAO, as also was mentioned yesterday. The triggering algorithms established by EUROCONTROL jointly with RTCA and ELT-DTs are based upon both the existing first-generation beacon specifications, modified to meet ICAO requirements, as well as the ability to have second-generation signal and messaging schemes, which allow for more information to be provided and allow for independent location. As was mentioned in a presentation yesterday, first-generation beacons being implemented on aircraft in many cases will be programmable to be upgraded to second-generation capabilities, which are more robust. And testing of both technologies is well underway. So what are the Annex 6 requirements very quickly? Allow the location of airplane accident site within 6 nautical miles. We'll be able to do that both from reported location and with second-generation beacons from our own independent location, trilateration. Allow the position of aircraft to be determined at least once every minute. COSPA-SARSAT will meet and exceed that frequency reporting requirement. Able to operate in the event of aircraft power loss. All ELTs have built-in battery power supplies. And commence no more than 5 seconds after detection of abnormal flight conditions. This was a question that was raised yesterday. We indeed will meet that specification. Current ELTs are specified for 7 seconds from automatic activation. So this is not a big change from current specifications. So alert data distribution, our GADSS compliant alert data distribution. This, in many respects, is the unsung hero of the COSPA-SARSAT system, is our ability on the ground to quickly and accurately distribute alerts. We do that through a number of data distribution components. I'll let you read about these yourself in your spare time, but these are the elements of our ground data distribution network. And here is how it works. And I want to draw your attention separately to what's above the two horizontal lines and what's below them. So above them, on the left-hand side, you see an aircraft in distress. You see that the ELT-DT sends that message to the satellites. Satellites return it to a LUT, a local user terminal, which is an Earth station. That sends it to a mission control center, an MCC, which is a device for properly distributing the data. And it may be moved on to a nodal MCC, because we operate with a nodal network, and then to the destination mission control center that eventually forwards it to the rescue coordination center. It's important to note that on the portion of this diagram above the two horizontal lines, that COSPA-SARSAT does now and will continue in the future to distribute all alerts directly to rescue coordination centers through our ground data distribution network. That does not change. However, in order to meet the GAD compliant requirement for feeding of the location of an aircraft in distress repository, the latter, you will see the green dashed line that I've circled with the yellow oval, and you will see that the nodal MCC network of COSPA-SARSAT above will send the distress data to the latter so that the latter can distribute that information to air traffic service units, ATSUs, to airline operators, and allow additional querying from RCCs for additional information. This is the way in which we are GADSS compliant for data availability, and we are redundant because RCCs have at least 2 opportunities to acquire the data. This is a diagram that shows, it's a little bit of a busy diagram, but it shows in detail how the COSPA-SARSAT system works. You can see on the right-hand side, either an aircraft or others in distress. Again, the beacon message goes to the satellites. From the satellites, it goes to the downlink to an earth station, and then into the, excuse me, the ground data distribution network, the mission control centers, and then alerting to a rescue coordination center. So looking 10 years ahead, COSPA-SARSAT will be a reliable provider of GADSS distress alerting services. We're approaching more than 70 satellites in orbit with large footprints. 2 well-tested message schemes, first and second generation beacons, the ability to redundantly locate a beacon, even if a navigation message is not available in the beacon message. Again, particularly for second generation beacons for ELT-DTs. We have a ground data distribution network that has been tested for 40 years, and we have the ability for alert validation. Now, I want to point out that COSPA-SARSAT will be one of a blend of GADSS solutions, because as I mentioned earlier, solutions such as ADS-B provide some advantages in terms of normal tracking, in terms of a breadcrumb trail. So they have that advantage. But I mentioned some limitations earlier from the example of Egypt Air Flight MS-804. And it's also important to note that solutions based upon a low Earth orbiting network such as Iridium, when one gets to low latitudes, in particular around the equator, there often may be only one spacecraft in visibility, which means if the aircraft goes into an abnormal flight orientation, the antenna may be blocked from the satellite, and you lose that one contact opportunity that may exist at low latitudes, such as at the equator. With COSPA-SARSAT, you will always have 12 or more satellites in visibility at different angles. So that's the advantage that we bring, the particular advantage that we bring in a distress situation. There will be multiple swim compliant options. And again, each of them brings its advantages and disadvantages. As ICAO has, I think, wisely determined, the principle will be one of choice and integration of solutions. The takeaways I can leave you with are, we provide, as an intergovernmental organization, we provide alerts globally free of charge to over 200 countries and territories. MEOSAR began operation in 2016. ELT-DTs are being specified to meet the ICAO deadlines with proven technology. Importantly, comparable fit and finish to existing ELTs, so it makes it a little bit easier for the airframe manufacturers to install a COSPA-SARSAT type ELT-DT. We have the second generation signal and messaging scheme being finalized. We have, of course, in-flight triggering as required for ADT and the return link service. The question was raised yesterday again, and as I mentioned earlier, will COSPA-SARSAT feed data to the latter? The answer is yes. And not only is it yes, but we've been extensively working with and closely working with ICAO to test and finalize the arrangements for that. And then finally, as I mentioned, our capability is well demonstrated by the experience of Egypt Air MS-804, a situation where COSPA-SARSAT ELT provided a more accurate location 7 minutes after the last ADS-B transmission was received. So I believe that covers it, Mr. Chairman. I can answer any questions later as you see fit. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Steve, for this comprehensive overview presenting COSPA-SARSAT and its role in rolling out and operating the GADSS. So if you have questions on COSPA-SARSAT, this presentation to Steve, please write them in the Q&A. I see a few already, so we will come back to that in the Q&A session, or if there are already answers, being able to, if we can already give answers in writing, we do that as well. Good, thank you. We go to the next presentation, which is the first use case, in fact, and this will be presented by Philippe Plantin-Duc. Philippe?
Yep, thank you, Hank. And my presentation will share with you the expected benefits of GADSS function for an accident over oceanic area. And for my example, I will use the AF447. So in some few words, I will give you some basic information about the event. So the aircraft disappeared over South Atlantic area on the 1st of June 2009. So BA was informed in the morning by the Air France CCO. And so very quickly, in fact, we found out that the Airbus A330 has disappeared about on international waters, and the BA was in charge of the investigation because he was state of the registry, state of manufacture, state of design, etc. So the first floating parts were found 6 days after the accident. It was a major issue to find the wreckage. And in fact, we found out the wreckage almost 2 years after the accident. It was, I would say, a very difficult area because little known about the area, about the currents and seabed. And precisely on the 1st of June each year, the currents are changing side. So everything is moving. It was a very complex time and location. As you can see, there was some mountains and a very difficult area again on the bottom of the sea. So the aircraft on a voluntary basis, so Air France decided to report every 10 minutes its position. At the end, 24 ACARS messages were sent after the autopilot disconnect. And in fact, from the last message and the last reported position, there was about 5 minutes. So we estimated that we had about 5 minutes of flight. And that led to a 40 nautical mile radius search area. So you will see the last reported position and where we found out, in fact, the wreckage after the fourth sea search period. So for my presentation, I will focus on the air transmission. So I will not speak about the ULBs, because in fact, now we have, so I will say all aircraft performing long-haul flight over water are equipped with a low-frequency beacon. So we believe that would add help to find the wreckage, because you can detect the ULB at a longer distance and with very different means. So on my presentation, I will focus on the air transmission. And for that, I will separate the flight in 4. Part one is the cruise part from, I would say, the beginning of the flight up to the autopilot disconnect. Part two, from the autopilot disconnect to the triggering of the, I would say, the distress situation. Part three will be from the beginning of the distress situation to the end of flight. And finally, the flight recorder data recovery part. On the left, you will be able to track where we are in the presentation. So for some of the parts, you will see some animation. So let me first give you some information about the animation. So here you have the primary flight display. Just on the bottom, you will have ECAM messages. Then left and right side stick and thrust levers in the middle. Here you will be to see the 3D view of the aircraft along its track. We will have here the red warning, like a stall. And here you have the orange warning, like single chime. And here on the top right hand, you will see the angle of attack. So you will be able to see what was the position of the aircraft with the airflow. So as I said, the Air France was reporting its position every 10 minutes. So while I'm speaking, you will see the animation. The cruise was at the level, flight level 350, Mach 0, 82. So we have SARPs for reporting position every 15 minutes. So it could be not sufficient to precise locate the aircraft, but for AF447, without an aircraft reporting every 10 minutes, it should have been completely impossible to find the wreckage. So this is not part of the GADSS. This is a normal situation between the autopilot disconnect to the distress situation. But we have already many manufacturers that are working on, I would say, abnormal situation, potential distress, and performing or sharing information with the operator. So definitely, even if it is not included in the GADSS, it could be very beneficial to anticipate distress situation and to provide as soon as possible information to the operator. And this is between, on the climb, between the autopilot off and the stall warning. So you will see here the part of the animation. So we have autopilot disconnect. We can see some ECAM messages. You will see that on the right side stick, there is mainly nose-up position inputs. You can see the aircraft climbing. You will be able to see all the information on the primary flight display. Sometimes we have stall warnings, but it is very short, 1 second. And in fact, it is part of the triggering criteria to be robust enough and to avoid a false positive, to have some persistence time. So it means that if you have a stall warning for 1 second, it will not trigger the distress situation. But as soon as you have 3 seconds, I think this is what we found out when we work on the triggering criteria 10 years ago. It could be a good value, but it will be up to the manufacturer to decide the best persistence time. So the distress situation is very similar to the beginning of the stall warning. So as you can see, the triggering criteria that could be activated are unusual attitude, unusual speed. We believe that on most of the triggering criteria that will be developed by the manufacturers, in fact, it will be a combination of unusual attitude and unusual speed. But as well, we will have then at the end collision with terrain and total loss of thrust propulsion on all the engines. So the aircraft reached 37,000 feet, max 60 N, and angle of attack of 5 degrees. That could be so the triggering criteria for the stall warning and the distress situation. And from this time and up to the end of flight, we have 216 seconds. So you will see part of the animation. So we have a persistent stall warning. We have thrust lever put to the wall. Still right side stick moving a lot. Still some ACARS messages. You will see that very quickly the position and so angle of attack will become very important here. So we have stall and cricket, so it is very noisy in the cockpit. And this is the information we have up to the end. So we have a distress situation continuously activated up to the end of the flight. So for my presentation, I will use ELT-DT system. So it was already well detailed on the presentation before me. So the expectation is to have an ELT-DT triggered by a triggering logic processors and using MEOSA constellation, as you have seen on the previous presentation. In the case of MS-804, only one burst was sufficient to provide already a good location of the aircraft. So T-chart was provided by COSPAS-SARSAT. So this is the rate of transmission using the ELT-DT. So we have the triggering criteria just here. Between the criteria and the impact, 216 seconds. So if you remove the 5 seconds to trigger the first transmission, from the first minutes, you have a transmission every 5 seconds. And then after 2 minutes, it goes to every 10 seconds. So from the computation I perform, so we have the impact here. And so between the last reported position and the time of the impact, there was only 2 seconds. So at the end of the flight, we still had a triggering criteria active, distress situation active. And from what we calculate, oops, sorry. So it was the end of flight, so it is why there is no animation. The expected position provided by the ELT-DT should have been about 0.1 nautical mile. So definitely it is much better than the precision of 40 nautical miles that we had leading to 5 sea search operation. So I detailed the location in distress phase. Flight recorder data recovery. So I'm convinced that it is not because you find the wreckage that you are going to find the flight recorder. Each time is very challenging. Between brackets, we have been lucky for that one because it was on a flat area with sand, very good visibility, nothing above the flight recorder, and you can see pictures taken at 4,000 meter depth. You can see the arm of the ROV grabbing the flight recorder, put it in a basket, closing the basket, and putting it up to the sea surface. So, as I said, the wreckage found 22 months after the accident. Because we were prepared to locate the wreckage, we did prepare everything, so we were able to recover the flight recorders 25 days after the recovering or finding the wreckage. But when you have an accident, the time to set up all the system to launch a vessel to locate the wreckage and the recorder is not so fast. We spend almost 6 million euros just for the recovery phase, included in the 32 million euros in total. We're convinced that the recovery of an ADFR that could have been deployed at the time of the accident would have permitted very quickly to have the complete set of data So again, audio parameters, data link, and image or flight control machine interface recording. So definitely this data in advance will help to select the parts to recover. We still need to recover computers because they will be complementing the FTR or flight recorder data. But it can help us not to remove or to retrieve, for example, the engines. And in such a case, even if you are not able to have the fixed recorder, you have all the flight recorder data already on the ground. So in conclusion, it would have been almost impossible to recover the aircraft without the aircraft tracking, for sure. Nevertheless, it is not sufficient. So this is why we need a redundant system like the low frequency ELTs, like the ADT. And as you can see, the ADT, so the ELT-DT, for my example, would have provide a very good position of location of the accident. And definitely flight recorder data recovery will be of great help to increase the probability to recover the flight recorder data in timely manner. So this is concluding my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Philippe. It's good to see this practical example how GADSS would have improved, which between parentheses, of course, the situation as well. It would certainly have improved the situation in terms of search and rescue initiation, and also the recovery of the wreckage and of course the flight data. And just for information to everyone, in developing the GADSS concept, and of course what was developed from the GADSS concept, we took all these accidents as an input, and we tested the GADSS concept against all these accidents that are known, and to see if they would have been not prevented but improved in terms of search and rescue and flight data recovery, and that was the conclusion at the end. So thanks again, Philippe. Again, if you have questions to Philippe on this case, please put them on the Q&A. We see Philippe back later in this webinar when he is going to present about accident investigation. The next presentation will also be a use case, and will be given by Ian Knowles. And Ian, please, the floor is yours.
So a little different focus on this one. Second use case, we're going to look at an incident involving an Air Transat aircraft from 2001. The good news is that this one actually had a successful outcome, so that's a little bit more positive. So this is 24th of August 2001. It was an Air Transat Airbus A330 on a scheduled commercial flight from Toronto to Lisbon. 293 passengers, 293 persons on board, passengers and crew. As I said, this one fortunately did have a successful outcome, but I think it's useful from a GADSS perspective to look at how the GADSS system would have interacted with some of the different stakeholders, and in particular highlighting the coordination aspects that I think would have been really interesting to see on this. So the incident itself starts with the aircraft in the cruise at flight level 390. The little clock on the top right you can see there is just to keep track of the event. So I've added in the actual time of the event and the elapsed time. So I'm starting the elapsed time at 0 here, which is 5:33 UTC. Aircraft's in the cruise, and the crew are alerted to a fuel imbalance and perform the relevant actions. So in this case, involved shutting the right fuel tanks pumps off, opening the cross-feed valve, and then effectively feeding both the engines from the left tank. So that was the start of it. Not much to see here from a GADSS perspective. Obviously, we're just handling a fairly straightforward, non-normal situation, so no involvement at this stage. Skimming forward 12 minutes, we're now at 5:45 in the morning. At this point, the fuel on board of the aircraft is actually below 7 tons. The aircraft en route to Lisbon, it currently doesn't have enough fuel to make its final destination. So obviously the situation has deteriorated quite significantly. Crew are in discussions and decide at this point that a diversion to the Azores is the sensible course of action to take. Again, from a GADSS perspective, this is not something that we would expect to pick up yet. The aircraft is flying normally. Yes, they have a low fuel scenario, but there's nothing actually that would necessarily involve GADSS at this point in time. Moving forward another few minutes, we're now at 5:54, so this is 21 minutes after the initial determination of the problem. The fuel leak is continuing, and at this point, the crew decide to do some actions. They're concerned, in fact, that the possibility of the fuel leak here is due to a leak in the right fuel tank. So in order to try and use up the right fuel, they switch the left pumps off, they put the right pumps on, so now they're feeding both the engines on the aircraft from the right fuel tank. At this point in time, they are decreasing fuel quite rapidly. They've already made that decision to make the diversion to the Azores, but the fuel is continuing to leak and the situation is becoming more serious. 5:54 in the morning, 21 minutes again, they're in contact with their own operator's maintenance control center now. Indicated fuel on board is 4.8 tons, which is very, very low. It's in fact 12 tons below the planned fuel that they should have at this point in the flight. So again, this is 21 minutes. So what we're looking at here is a crew dealing with a fuel leak, following the recommendations, actioning all the non-normal procedures. But again, from a GADSS perspective, there's no involvement at this stage. Nothing has been declared. There's no significant impact to the operation of the aircraft, although it's clearly becoming a more serious situation as it goes on. After 26 minutes, so 5:59 in the morning, the fuel remaining now is a little over 4 tons. And so the fuel situation is continuing to worsen. And with further discussion, so at this point, moving on to 6:13, the fuel leak continues. At this point, in fact, the right engine flamed out. They're 150 miles away from Largesse Airport on the Azores at this point, and they're now on one engine with a very low fuel state on board the aircraft. 40 minutes have elapsed since the initial diagnosis of a fuel leak problem. Now, again, from a GADSS perspective, we're still not looking at anything that would particularly raise any obvious alerts here. Where the aircraft is still flying. Admittedly, we're on a single engine now, so engine 2, the right engine, has flamed out and has been shut down, but the aircraft is still flying on one engine and is in course of diverting towards a serviceable airfield. So not a dire emergency at this stage. The crew did, however, declare an emergency, so they actually declared a mayday at this point to the Air Traffic Service Unit. This is Santa Maria Oceanic Flight Information Region. So an emergency was declared. So the Air Traffic Service Unit is now aware of the seriousness of this problem. The crew is en route to divert towards Largesse. 50 minutes have elapsed since the first diagnosis of a fuel imbalance and a possible issue here. At 6:26, after 53 minutes, the left engine also flamed out. So now the aircraft has no remaining engines. And at this point, had it been fitted with an ADT, the ADT would have activated. We've discussed a couple of times over the last 2 days this idea about the distress condition, about the fact that the autonomous distress tracking is supposed to activate in a condition which, if left uncorrected, would lead to an accident. And in the EUROCONTROL document ED-237, there are a number of such conditions that would comply. Philippe just talked in his presentation about unusual attitude and unusual speed for the phase of flight, and certainly those are ones that would trigger the activation of an ADT. One of the other ones that is clearly stated is loss of power, loss of thrust on all engines. So as soon as that second engine shuts down, the left engine flames out and is closed by the crew. We're now in a situation where the aircraft has no remaining thrust. The ADT would activate, and again, according to the requirements from Annex 6, that first position report would be required to be sent within 5 seconds of that distress condition being determined. So 6:26 a.m., 53 minutes after the first fuel issue has been diagnosed, the ADT on this aircraft is now active, and a position report is sent within 5 minutes. This next slide is a little different. you'll notice in the time here that I put this as 6:27 with an amber digit on the final point of the time. So we know that at 6:26 the ADT activated, or would have activated, and would have sent that position report within 5 seconds. The question is, at what point does that information make it to the repository, the ladder, and at what point then does the ladder receive it, process that information, and start issuing notifications based on it? So the guidance that we have in DOC 10,054 talks about the time from transmission to receipt being in the order of a few minutes. So it's not prescriptive. It certainly doesn't go into any specific details. Obviously, it's quite a complex scenario involving space-based segments and ground-based segments. What we actually know from discussions with service providers of tracking systems, one of whom you heard from in yesterday's session, if you were listening to the webinar yesterday. So that organization plus a couple of others, excuse me, we've had discussions with them about the time taken from transmission to receipt in their own databases. And what they tell us is that consistently that happens in less than a minute. So when I've estimated here 6:27, we know that the ADT activation was at 6:26. We're looking at something in the order of a few minutes, although realistically, based on experience of aircraft tracking service providers, less than a minute. So 6:27, that information actually arrives in the location of an aircraft in distress repository. As soon as it hits the repository, that system will then start to issue notifications to those users who are signed up and who are relevant. So in this case, we're talking about the operator, the flight information region, and also the RCC for the relevant section. If you were listening yesterday, then you'll have seen my discussion on the ladder. If you weren't listening to it, I understand all the presentations are going to be available after the webinar, so you can go back and have a look through it. But this essentially shows you the home screen of the viewer. So again, we need to be careful when we're talking about the ladder repository. What it really is the data store for this information. This is the online viewer of the ladder. But this is what you would see in this instance. You'd see a warning triangle appearing over the middle of to the eastern side of the Atlantic in the Santa Maria Oceanic Airspace area. And it allows for very quick identification of where the problem is and draws you into looking for that information. When you go and select that, then again, it gives you much more detailed information. Again, this is a screenshot from the prototype. So the information you're seeing here is a little limited. It's just lat long, time of transmission, and then some identification information for the aircraft. But again, it would enable you to positively identify that aircraft. You'll get the 3-letter designator, the registration of the aircraft, the 24-bit address, call sign, and flight number if they're available. But importantly, you get the transmission time and the lat and long of the aircraft where that position was sent. So remember, at 6:26, second engine shuts down. 5 seconds after that, the first position report is sent from the onboard ADT detecting that distress condition, and roughly probably 1 minute, so around 6:27, that information is now in the repository and available for anyone to access. It's a fairly key point here, actually, I'd just like to mention, because there has been some misunderstanding here. There's no gatekeeping of this information. If the ADT is activated, the position information is sent, and if the information is sent, it will go into the ladder repository. So that at no time is there a human in the loop that has to look at that and decide whether or not this is a genuine activation or whether it needs to be sent. The data that's sent goes to the repository, and anyone looking in the repository who has the access credentials that match this data, because we do gatekeep the data just in terms of data confidentiality, but anyone looking in the ladder will be able to see it. So at this point, anyone opening up the ladder, like the Air Traffic Service Unit responsible for Santa Maria would be able to see this. RCCs would see it, the operator themselves would see it, because the information flow to the repository is automatic. So once that data hits the repository, then notifications will be sent out to those stakeholders that register for them. It is an optional functionality, but one that's recommended. This on the top left is a sample notification email that we had from our workshop in August. So it basically identifies that new data has arrived, and it gives you the summary details of the event, and then that link to the web-based viewer to find it. In this case, we're showing a two-way link between the ladder and the operator. Annex 6 defines the requirement of the operator to make that information available, which we're assisting with the production of the ladder. In fact, it's probably the case that an operator will select an ADT service provider who will have a direct link to the ladder themselves. So the system is installed on the aircraft. Once it's activated, the data flows through that service provider directly to the ladder repository and doesn't go to the operator to require the operator to do anything with it. And that's kind of the point I was making about the automated flow. So it could be the case, in fact, that the notification that the operator receives that the aircraft is in distress could itself come from the ladder. So the third-party provider could send that information direct to the repository. Operator receives a notification. That's not necessarily the way it has to function, but that's one option. In terms of other notifications, then obviously the air traffic service unit that's controlling the airspace, in this case Santa Maria Oceanic, the RCC, which is largest, and this other entity that's defined in the annex as anyone defined by the state of the operator that needs to have access to that data. And an accident investigation bureau, for example, would be a good example there. So let's have a quick look at geographically where everyone is at this point. The aircraft itself is not far from the Azores. It's in the Santa Maria Oceanic airspace, just around about 60, 70 miles west. It has an active ADT that puts it around about the tip of this arrow here. Air traffic services are being provided by Santa Maria Oceanic, the area control center itself, also in the southern Azores. So actually in this case, relatively close by geographically speaking, although clearly that's not always going to be the case. In this example, those entities are reasonably close. You can imagine if this incident was taking place just to the north in Shannick Oceanic area, for example, there could be several hundred or multiple hundreds of miles separating the actual physical location of the aircraft from the control center. In this case, in fact, they're geographically relatively concurrent. The Rescue Coordination Center for this area, in fact, is largest. So that's also the point at which the aircraft is diverting to. So again, in this case, relatively close from a geographical perspective. It's possible that the Maritime RCC, which is in Ponta Delgado, might also want to be involved at this stage. There is a suggestion that maybe Lisbon RCC as the kind of main RCC for Portugal would want to have some kind of indication. That's not necessary at this stage. Certainly the RCC for the controlling area is in Largesse, which is here, and then the Maritime RCC in Ponta Delgado. The operator itself, of course, Air Transat, is based in Montreal. So they're all the way over on the east coast of Canada, all the way up here. So if we put that on the same map, then we can get a little bit more of an idea of what's happening here. So here's the Ops Control Center for the operator in Montreal. The aircraft currently 65 miles-ish west of Largesse. We've got the Area Control Center and the RCC in the southern Azores, and we've got potentially the Lisbon RCC. Also bearing in mind, of course, that Lisbon is the destination aerodrome. So it's kind of relevant, even if the RCC itself is not specifically connected to this event. So it gives you a bit of an idea about what's happening here. All of these various actors have a vested interest in this aircraft. The aircraft itself, obviously, the ACC, the RCC, the operator. What's instructive at this point is to think about how the coordination can work, because remember, we've had at 6:26, we've had the second engine shutdown. We've got the first data transmission to the repository, which is received, we think, at around about 6:27. Any of these entities now, the operator, the air traffic service unit, the rescue coordination center, can open up that ladder repository, and all of them are now seeing the same information. They're all getting a live data feed, or seeing the last known position of the aircraft based on what's being transmitted from the ADT, and they're all having the same information that they can view and be updated from. Regardless of where they are and what's happening, that consistent picture that they're all getting is going to really help the coordination between the two of them. Talking of coordination, so what we currently have in terms of contact between the operators and the ATSUs, it was a question that came up yesterday actually in relation to my presentation on the ladder about how the different stakeholders coordinate with each other. At the moment, what we have is something called the Ops Control Directory. So we have operational contact details for air navigation service providers and air operators. Currently, this is being done on a voluntary basis. So we're asking for, we had a state letter requesting the information for oceanic airspace service providers and requesting operators to fill that in. Work is ongoing regarding requiring ANSPs to provide this operational contact data to really make sure that's firmed up. So this set up in response to originally to the aircraft tracking work from the NATI initiative. This provides a direct contact detail for ANSPs and operators to talk to one another. It's also worth noting that the ops control is currently the means by which we're intending to provide access to the ladder. So if someone, an ANSP or an operator, and eventually RCCs as well, wants to have access to the ladder, they will have to create an entry in the ops control directory, provide their operational contact details, and it's that login system for the ops control which then provides access to the ladder repository. So also we're using the ops control for data access, but we're also leveraging the two as well. So the more people that sign up to the ladder, the more contact details we have in the ops control, etc. So there is already a fairly good degree of integration between the repository and this contact database. There's been suggestions and some comments even received since yesterday that we should do more to integrate the two, and certainly that's something we're keen to explore, bearing in mind that the ladder functionality, the core functionality, has to be storing and making available that position data. And once we've got that in place, then we can start looking at what else we can do to expand and improve it. But certainly all of those entities now, the stakeholders you saw from the world map, which are quite geographically distant, they have the means to contact each other. They're all looking at the same information in terms of the position data that's in the ladder repository. So they have a very good shared understanding of what the situation is and what's happening. Moving on then, 6:31, 58 minutes after the initial diagnosis of the problem, we've now got 6 position reports in the repository, or at least we would have if this was a GADSS event. Information is transferred, the aircraft goes to largest control. They're about 8 miles off the runway here at 13,000 feet. No engines, so glide approach 13,000 feet. But there are 6 position reports currently in the ladder. And again, any one of those stakeholders can open up the ladder and can see that same information. They get a good visual picture of what's happening. Also worth noting, and again, I touched on it a little bit yesterday in the ladder discussion, that the basic information from the prototype is just lat long position and aircraft ID. The ladder is being designed to accept a lot more information than that, in particular some optional elements which have the altitude and the heading and the ground speed. So not just the 6 position reports, but also you can use that information to extrapolate and provide you with more detailed final position. Also, as we saw from Steve's presentation earlier and from Philippe, this 6 position reports is assuming the worst case scenario of a position report every minute, because that's what the Annex 6 standard requires. Now, we've seen that in terms of the ELT-DT and in terms of the some of the other solutions that were presented yesterday, they can do a lot better than 1 every minute, and the ladder can accept a lot more than 1 every minute. In some of the trials that we had just sending data to the system, we can more or less send data at whatever frequency it can be provided, and the ladder will just accept it, plot it all. So 6 position reports here is worst case scenario, 1 every minute in accordance with the standards. It could be a lot more than that. That's running ahead of myself. That's a little bit of a discussion there about the altitude and the ground speed. These are all this is the functional specification table of all the optional data elements, so it shows you what else could be included. In this particular example, fortunately for everyone involved, 6:45 the aircraft landed in Largest Airport. Again, that's a glide approach landing, no engine, so remarkably good outcome for this particular event. 72 minutes after the initial diagnosis of a fuel problem, by which point, had this been a GADSS event, we'd have had a minimum of 20 position reports in the repository, tracking that flight all the way down to the runway. And bearing in mind, this is an unusual event, happily so, that actually ended really well with the aircraft landing successfully. It's not hard to imagine a slightly different set of circumstances in which the fuel imbalance had occurred earlier in the flight, or it had been on a much more northerly track and unable to reach the airport, in which case the activation of the ADT on that second engine shutdown would immediately have started that tracking process, taking that minimum of 1 report every minute. So in this case, 20 position reports following all the way down to the ground, and again, potentially including that optional data as well on the altitude, heading and ground speed to provide even further refinement on that final location position. One of the optional fields that we have possibly in the ladder is a cancellation message. In this case, it's maybe not entirely obvious, but the idea being that if an aircraft enters a distress condition and then recovers, then the transmission of those position reports is going to stop. And obviously, there's a big difference between transmission of position reports stopping because the aircraft recovers and transmission of position reports stopping because the aircraft has crashed. So one of the optional messages we want to try and encourage in the repository is this cancellation message. I think it's probably fair to say that aircraft weight on wheels following a landing would be a fairly good signal to the ADT to stop sending a message. And so we'd get that final position report of the aircraft on the runway in largest with a cancellation message saying, okay, the condition is no longer, the aircraft is no longer in distress. And that would update into the ladder repository as well. And you'd be able to see then the condition being cancelled and know that the aircraft was on the ground. And again, from that view we had before of the map of the Atlantic, that huge geographical spread of the different actors and stakeholders that are involved in this would all be able to have that same update. So they're all looking at the same picture, they're all getting the same information. And once again, finally, this option, this particular GADSS use case ended well, but I think the discussion of what the various elements of the GADSS are and how they fit together really shows how it could have been useful, even in a scenario where it hadn't gone quite so well. That facilitation of the coordination of the updating of the information and the contact between the different stakeholders really shows, I think, the value of having all of this information in the one place. So that's all from me, and I will hand back to Hank.
Many thanks, Ian. Also an excellent way to demonstrate the usefulness of the GADSS, how the GADSS will react to various conditions, and yeah, for all these purposes we have put the GADSS together. The next presentation will be given by Sean. And Sean will be talking about some other aviation technologies like space-based ADS-B, and how these technologies can also be used to assist in search and rescue operations, and in particular from a general aviation perspective. Sean, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Very much. So, good afternoon, everybody, and I'm going to talk to you now about the benefits of space-based ADS-B and aerial alert for an accident over an oceanic area. Notice I'm not necessarily covering GADSS or GADSS compliance. I'm just going to talk about aerial alert and the capacities that we have to enhance search and rescue organisations when they are in a difficult situation over the oceanic areas. So, before we do that, we'll just talk a little bit about the current global air traffic surveillance challenges and the difference that space-based ADS-B brings. So before the advent of space-based ADS-B, as you can see there, we only had 30% coverage in terms of radar, with radars operating effectively from ground-based sources. That meant that 70% of the Earth's surface was uncovered. With space-based ADS-B, we now have 100% real-time coverage, and I'll show you some examples of how that operates later. So what does that mean? It means we've got no longer line of sight limitations. So before, we would have had limitations with mountain ranges, we would have had reflections. With space-based ADS-B, the satellites are directly above and looking down. So in essence, you have got full efficiency all across the globe in terms of detection of 1090 out transponders. So how does Ariane work? As you can see there from the graphic, what we have is we have a number of satellites that are orbiting on polar orbits around the Earth. Clearly the coverage at the polars is a lot better, but you can see even at the equator, what we have there is we have one satellite moving to be replaced by another satellite. There are some areas of single coverage, but there are multiple satellites covering at the other extremes. In terms of the data that's coming from those, when it's coming into an air traffic center, if someone has purchased data, you're talking about a latency of about 0.6 of a second from the message leaving the aircraft, being detected by the space-based satellite, and then transiting down to a ground station, being distributed, and then being displayed on the radar in front of a controller. There are 66 satellites in total. We utilize the Iridium Next constellation for them. And if you look at the picture of the satellite, you'll see what is in essence a Lego brick in the top left. And that is the transmitter we utilize for Ariane. There's 11 satellites per plane. And in addition to those that are currently in orbit, we have 9 in addition to the 66 as in-orbit spares and 6 ground spares as well in the event of a catastrophic failure. So you can see there some additional data. The 6 orbital planes, the availability is greater than 0.999. We have a lifestyle which is typical 14 years, and the satellites are operating in a low Earth orbit at approximately 720 kilometers above the surface. So here's the data I was talking about. So this is a typical example as of April 2019 of 100% global coverage. The different colors you see are the bandings in relation to where the aircraft were detected. So red, amber and yellow. Red is up to 2,000 feet, amber is 2,000 to 5,000 feet, and then 5,000 feet to 10,000 feet on the yellow. So as you'd imagine, that's predominantly around the major terminal airports, terminal areas. You can see a large amount in Europe, and then moving again across there to the Americas and Australia there as well. What you can also see then is the aircraft in transit moving up to the dark blues above 40,000 feet where they are detected. But you can see every inch of the globe is covered. We have full polar coverage, all those polar routes covered, and all those oceanic areas that were previously not covered by traditional surveillance detection techniques are now available with full radar type coverage. So what does this mean in relation to reporting and the accuracy of data? So in these oceanic areas, we've gone from potentially voice reporting positions with a 30-minute update to ADS-C with a 12 to 14-minute update. And what you now have is you have ATS surveillance available, which is exactly the same as you would get out of an MLAT system, a traditional surveillance system, or a ground-based system for ADS-B available from space. So what's the impact on search and rescue? And that is significant. As has previously been mentioned, when we're looking at volumes for searching, with a narrow-bodied aircraft, with a position report 30 minutes apart, you've got a volume of approximately 491,000 square kilometers, somewhere the size of California. For a wide-bodied aircraft, it's even bigger, 607,000, something the size of the state of Texas. It reduces, obviously, as you have ADS-C and ADS-C position reporting. But when you're getting down to space-based ADS-B position reporting, you are getting 8-second updates. And as you can see, we're bringing the size of the search area down to approximately 10 square kilometers, something the size of a small relative town as opposed to a state. So how does Ariane Alert work?
Ariane Alert is the aviation industry's first and only free emergency aircraft location service. When an emergency incident occurs, air navigation service providers, commercial aircraft operators, regulators, and search and rescue personnel across the globe are able to rely on Ariane Alert to get the most accurate aircraft position data available. Before Arion's space-based ADS-B system, real-time aircraft tracking and surveillance was not possible for the entire planet. Remote areas, oceans, and the polar regions had little or no air traffic surveillance. In an emergency situation, even a few minutes can make a world of difference, and gaps in surveillance translated to safety, financial and environmental dangers. Now that Arion Alert is available by Arion and the Irish Aviation Authority, all that has changed. By registering for free 24/7 Arion Alert service, air navigation service providers, commercial aircraft operators, regulators, and search and rescue organizations are able to quickly get precise recent location information across the globe for all ADS-B out 1090 megahertz equipped aircraft. To get started, pre-register at ArionAlert.com and log into the Arion Alert dashboard for your unique number and personal identification number. You will be able to use this user number and PIN with the dial information provided, and an Arion Alert operator will provide a 4-dimensional report based on the flight ID or hex address. Arion Alert's 4-dimensional reports immediately supply latitude, longitude, altitude, and time, allowing responders to quickly and accurately locate aircraft. A full report will also be emailed directly to your account with a 4-dimensional report covering the last 15 minutes of flight. Arion Alert is the first and only free global emergency aircraft location service that offers data at this level. If you're an air navigation service provider, commercial aircraft operator, regulator, or search and rescue organization, visit ArionAlert.com.
So where are we today? As you can see there at the moment, we've been live since July 2018, so just over 18 months. We have 394 active registrations across 308 unique organizations in 119 countries. We have 145 airlines registered, 108 ANSPs registered, 57 search and rescue organizations registered, and then a number of regulators and a few miscellaneous others. In terms of usage, we've had 65 requests to date. As you can see there from the pie chart, the majority of these are actually coming from the USA and from Australia. So a lot of the US ones would come from the CAP, the Civilian Air Patrol, or are coming from the National Radar Analysis Team. And again, the Australian ones are from the MRCC. Nearly all 65 have been in relation to light aircraft, to GAA type aircraft, and we have been able to assist. So the system was designed to operate on a 120 watt transponder, 1090, top and bottom mounted. But what we're actually finding now, even with a bottom mounted antenna solely and with a wattage far below that, we are getting some very significant data that is been very useful for the search and rescue organizations. And I'll show you some examples in a short while of that data. But first, just to explain how Arion Alert works. So as we've said in the video, it is free to register. If you are an airline operator, if you are a regulator, a search and rescue organization, you simply go to ArionAlert.com, you fill in the form and register. We don't have any great degree of security. We are looking for a normal identifier in relation to an email address so we can trace it back to an organization. We don't take Gmails, Hotmails, or anything of that type, but we will register you in approximately 5 days, and you will be given a log on. When you want to use the system, you simply log on, put in your password, and you will be given a number that you can call. So if you call that number, you will go into, in essence, a telephone banking system, which will say, welcome to Arion Alert, please enter your 8-digit number. You put that number in and you are straight through to the Arion Alert operator. The Arion Alert operator has access to the database, so he knows exactly who's calling. Right? In the event when they answer, they're looking for 2 pieces of information from you. Okay, they're either looking for the flight ID that the aircraft will have, what the pilot will have entered into the cockpit system, or ideally the ICAO 24-bit address. We prefer the 24-bit address simply because it is accurate. You know, we know that that will be the identifier where there potentially can be some variations on the flight ID that results in us not getting the data to people quite as quickly as we would have anticipated. Once that information is entered into the search system, there is an immediate response back to the operator, which is then verbally passed to the caller. So that is a 4-dimensional report with lat, long, altitude and time of the aircraft. So the caller can make an immediate decision there on what they need to do. We're not an RCC service. We are simply providing the information that we have to a registered caller to enable them to make a decision on what they need to do next. What we then do is we generate a report. And what happens is that we go back into the system, and the system extracts out the last 15 minutes data for that flight. So we give 1 minute intervals for 14 minutes of the flight. And then for the last minute of the flight, we provide every single plot that we have in relation to that. And we provide that in a package, which I'll show you shortly, together with a graphical representation of it. And we also provide a KLM file, which can be plugged into Google Earth, or which the search and rescue organizations are finding very, very useful indeed. In terms of the search time, we can go back for 5 days. After that, we assume that the data is not current or not required, but we search from immediately back to up to 5 days and give the first iteration we find for that flight or that 24-bit address. So this is an example. I've got 3 examples now of how we've assisted really in relation to real-life incidents. So this was on the 23rd of December 2019. We had a request made by one of the search and rescue teams in aiding to assist a missing Cessna Centurion aircraft that we believed had ditched close to the Bahamas. We did a search on the information, and what we got back is an indication that we were tracking the aircraft down to sea level. So you can see there in the graphic on the right, there are 6 returns there, starting at 3,000 feet, 3,300 feet, all the way down to sea level at 0. Now, how did this compare to the information they had? The last known target they had from the FAA was at 1,300 feet and was from a ground-based system. And the search and rescue organizations had already been dispatched at that point. Clearly, with the ARIAN data, the position became far more accurate, and they could clearly see it was greater than 2 nautical miles from the last position they had. When the search and rescue helicopter arrived, they found the pilot treading water with a half-functional life jacket, and the plane had sunk immediately on arrival. And the pilot was located 50 meters from the last ARIAN position when you take into account drift. So this is the type of accuracy of data we can potentially provide in these incidents. So here you can see the data that is provided. On the left, what we have then is we basically have a small graphical representation of where this is. So you can see it's close to the Bahamas. You can see the map of the states there. And then we have the points that were recorded just to the northeast of the Bahamas there. We have the information we provide, which is the timestamp, the flight ID, the mode 3A, the latitude, the longitude, the flight level, the speed, and the heading. So all the information that would be required to make an informed decision on what you wish to do in relation to assisting this aircraft. I've just extracted out there the data, so you can see some of the real-time data that we actually have. As you can see, the aircraft is maintaining flight level 170, has an engine failure, pulls up to try and maintain height, and then glides down to a successful ditching. Below that, you see a KML file, and that is the file that if I clicked on that would open up into a Google Earth, and I'll give you some examples of how we're using that in the next 2 or 3 slides. So another example here, this time from Northern Canada, again an area that has very little or no ground cover. You can see the data there coming in, and as you can see, there is some of the data that's missing an altitude there, and there's about 12 returns there. Those are the returns for the last minute of flight. And there is, believe it or not, a really good explanation for this. So if you look at the graphics there, you can see 3 graphics. So the first is expanded out, so you can see this flight, which was a seaplane that was operating up in northern Canada. It had communications with its base using a satellite phone, but the base had lost contact. So when we examined the data, we could see what looked like a strange profile, but bearing in mind that the aircraft might be doing survey, we didn't think anything about it. We then searched in on the aircraft, and as you can see then, what in essence happened is the plane had actually landed on an inlet. It was a float plane and had taxied to the shore. So again, you can see the position there. We have 3 returns where the aircraft is bobbing around, safely parked up next to a building on the shore. So that information was relayed back to the caller. They can then decide what they needed to do. I believe in this case, they waited for a call from a landline or from a different type of phone, and they believed that the aircraft was safe, and indeed it was. So the final one is one we had recently, which is a search and rescue mission associated with a ditching in the mid-Pacific, and that was on the 8th of November this year. It was a Pilatus PC-12 with 2 crew on board and declared a mayday with an engine failure mid-Pacific. So you can see there the dot in the mid-Pacific. The aircraft was 1,100 nautical miles from land, midpoint between Hawaii and the west coast of the US when the incident occurred. It led to a successful ditching, and we actually managed to track the aircraft all the way down to sea level with multiple returns while the aircraft was actually floating on the surface. The ARIN data confirmed that the ELT position to within 0.57 nautical miles, which was crucial in aiding the recovery of the crew who did get into a life raft and were picked up by a passing cargo ship about 5 hours later. And we can see there the direct quote from the JRCC. This is the second incident this week where your data has been invaluable to our search and rescue operations. And I'm going to show you why that data is invaluable. So this is the return that we provided. So you can see here, we're picking the aircraft up because we worked backwards for 15 minutes. At flight level 138, you can see the trajectory that the aircraft is taking as it loses flight there in a controlled ditching. And then we have multiple returns towards the latter part of the flight as it ditches. If I go in again, what you can now see is what this data relates to. So the aircraft ditched, it turned in to parallel the swell, ditched successfully. And then the last 10 returns you're seeing there, which are in gray, are returns from the aircraft whilst it floated on the ocean. So the scale we're down to there now is literally less than 1,000 meters. So the reports that you're getting there are showing the drift of the aircraft. And you can see if we were to click on those gray boxes, and I've opened up one, for example, we do get the aircraft ID, we get the ICAO, the altitude, the longitude, and the speed, which is 36 knots. So we are tracking this data down to probably within 50 meters of where it is. If we track an aircraft down to ground level and it is slow moving, you can almost rely on this piece of information to be completely accurate. So that just gives you a brief canter through ARIN Alert and its capabilities. I'm quite happy to answer any questions. And in terms of the accuracy of the data, just I should have reminded you earlier that it is actually approved by EASA. So irrespective of what global destination you use, that data is available from ARIN, and EASA has certified it for use in both an en route and in an oceanic environment. And I'll take any questions at the end, or if there's any questions now, I'm happy to answer them.
Thank you, Sean, and also very good to see this contribution to supporting search and rescue. The questions are in the Q&A box, and we are going to look at that later. So for everyone on the call, on the webinar, if you have any questions to any of the speakers or in GADSS, on GADSS in general, Please drop your question on the Q&A box, and we will come back at these questions after the final presentation. And the final presentation will be given by Philippe, and he will talk about accident investigation. And accident investigation is also one of the functions we support through the GADSS. And Philippe will talk about it in the last presentation of this GADSS webinar series. Philippe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Henk. So it is the last presentation. I will make sure that it will not long more than 10 minutes, so you will have time to ask a question to everybody. So at the end, I would like to show the expected benefit of GADSS function for accident investigation. So for sure, you will have understood that you are convinced of the GADSS function that will provide sufficient position accuracy for SAR and accident investigation. That recover the flight recorder data in timely manner is necessary, and GADSS function will provide that. But I will focus on the new challenges associated with the future flight recorder data recovery functions. Just to highlight that a disappearance of an aircraft is not similar to an accident. And to highlight that, I would like to show, in fact, the hits on internet with the keywords MH370. So I don't have to explain what is MH370, and MH17. MH17 is a 777 from Malaysia Airlines that was shut down over Ukraine. So same type of aircraft, same airline, approximately the same number of Malaysian people on board. And you will see that there is not at all the same expectation from the public about a disappearance and an accident. For the MH17, we can say that just a few days after the aircraft was shut down over Ukraine, families of victims came back and said, this is life. For MH370, families of victims have never been able to understand what happened and what happened for the victims on board the aircraft. So there is a real mystery of behind a disappearance, and we shall not have any disappearance, definitely. Challenges for flight recorder recovery. The photo on the bottom was in Sochi on the Black Sea, and it was at about 500 meters, and both recorders were under the level of the mud, and it was necessary to remove the mud around the flight recorder to able to grab it. And luckily, both ULB were attached. Otherwise, I think it would have been impossible to recover flight recorder, even if we knew perfectly the location. Another example, it is on the Mekong River. There was on flood, and it took weeks to find the wreckage. Not the wreckage, but the flight recorder. The beacon were still attached, fortunately, but it was a very challenging area to recover the flight recorder. Again, the accident of 737 MAX in Indonesia, one of the beacon detached, and it was very challenging to find the recorder below the level of the mud. So we have regular underwater aircraft recovery. You can see the summary. From all these events, we can see that there is 8 sets of recorders that have never been recovered. So I definitely think that flight recorder data recovery will be useful, and this is some statistical data that is showing that. Just to remind you, you have seen already this picture. So in the future, we will have an ADFR that can replace the recorder, the fixed recorder in the back. we will have exactly the same data than the fixed recorder. And if you are streaming the flight recorder data, it will be in addition of the two fixed combined recorders. So the expected benefits, so as you remember my presentation yesterday, there is two technology that could be a means of compliance for the flight recorder data recovery. First one is ADFR, and ADFR will provide a post-flight localization of the accident, will drift with the potential survivors, and if you recover in timely manner the ADFR, it will no longer be necessary to find out the fixed flight recorder because there will be exactly the same data. But ADFR, because you have exactly the same data, will allow you to better determine the path to recover on the bottom of the sea. There is some challenges associated with ADFR. And in fact, on the accident investigation group panel of the ICAO, we evaluate the potential challenges that we may face in the future. So who will be responsible to recover the ADFR? If you are recovering the flight recorder on the international water by a private vessel foreign flagged. So some new challenges that we are going to face, keeping in mind that we will benefit a lot if we are able to recover very quickly the flight recorders, the ADFR. So what will happen if we have an ADFR drifting into national waters of the state that is not participating in the safety investigation? So the AIGP is evaluating all these challenges, trying to list all of them and to be prepared for new challenges. Expected benefits of transmission of flight data. Again, quick recovery of the flight recorder data. The data shall be available or should be available on a secure servers. Nevertheless, we may not have all the set of parameters, including if, in fact, the transmission is triggered at the same time that the distress situation. So we may not have all the data available. We may have some priority given to the flight recorder data depending the attitude of the aircraft. So in such a case, anyhow, we will have to recover the fixed combined recorders and parts of the wreckage. The challenges associated with transmission of flight data is what will happen if you have to recover data on a secure cloud in a foreign country which is not involved on the investigation. What kind of protection of data transmitted from the aircraft to the ground, quality of the transmission, if your aircraft is banking and have unusual attitude. So we have question about that, and on the AIGP, we are discussing again all these potential solution. And in fact, what we are trying to do is that we are trying to build scenario to evaluate what are the potential issues that we are going to face, and we will try to see how we can face them and solve them. So I will not list everything. So just to say that we have already a lot of information on the manual 10,054 because it was we tried to anticipate all these issues and try to provide some information like for the protection of the data, and definitely we are giving a particular case regarding the protection and sharing of the flight recorder data transmitted. And some of the scenario, I will just give you a scenario. The aircraft is cruising at flight level 330. We are receiving ACARS messages. We are able to locate the wreckage. Nevertheless, both ULB are detached, and on the bottom of the sea, we are not able to recover the flight recorder. But we have CVR and FDR data stored on a secured server of the operator. So again, this is one example of concept scenario. We have an accident in international water. The state of registry is conducting safety investigation. On the left, CVR and FDR data are stored on a secure server on the state C, I will say, having victims in the accident. What will happen if the judicial system of the state C are going to take physically the hard disk? Or what will happen if the data if the data are taken by one of the states involved on the investigation and is performing, I will say, a parallel investigation because they have in parallel some of the data. So we try to evaluate all the potential scenario, and if in the future we are not able to find the flight recorders and data are stored on a secure server on an operator, there will be many questions from the public. Oh, are we sure that the data are secured? Are we sure that this is a real data? Because I will say very often this is a kind of question we have already during, I will say, between bracket, a normal investigation with flight recorders in our hands. So it will bring new issues that we will have to solve in the future. So definitely ADT will provide great benefit for SAR and to locate wreckage, and flight recorder data recovery will provide great benefits to be able to launch quickly an investigation. For AF447, as an example, we found out about 2 years after the accident, the wreckage. And I can say that the investigation started really when we found out the flight recorder. Prior that, we received a lot of messages from colleagues, from associations saying, okay, I've analyzed all the 24 ACARS messages and I can provide you a robust scenario for the accident, and the whole scenario were wrong. So really the investigation started when we found out the flight recorder, and it's not conceivable to have now an investigation without flight recorder to fully understand the cause of the accident. So I was short, but now we will have time for the questions.
Thanks, Philippe, and also thank you for being short. It's always appreciated. So if I see the panelists coming online, so if you could switch your camera back on, please, then we can see you. Steve, you're still off, but probably you managed to get on. So thank you first for all the very interesting presentations. There are quite a lot of questions that I saw passing by. Some of them have been answered already by you. It was good to see in this webinar how the GADSS is coming together through all these services and COSPAR SARSAT and all of that, and using the use cases to demonstrate what the GADSS would do and what it would mean. So let me turn to a number of questions that I see here. First, one for you, Ian. Is a question referring to oceanic radar data coming from offshore countries, and how this can be used to augment the accuracy of position information. So maybe you can elaborate on that, Ian.
Yeah, so I wanted to just kind of quickly answer this one live, because actually there was another couple of questions in there that have come through about use of other data, like Aerion alert data. So what we're trying to do with the ladder, because we understand that the ladder has to be able to receive ADT information from contributors. What we're trying to do is to make it available as a source of as a position repository for this other data as well. So we're trying to have it accessible to dumps from radar information to Aerion alert data and stuff, so we can bring all this information in as well. So then on the ladder we can show the ADT position reports as it comes in. Maybe we can overlay on top of that the Aerion alert data. Maybe we can supplement it with the radar data. We can bring all these in as different layers, just as a really quick and easy way of combining all this information into one place. So I thought it was worth answering that one live just for that comment. Really.
Thanks, Ian. A question which went already to the answered, but I really want to put it up also live. So Ian, you mentioned ADT service providers. So Cospa Sarsat and Arion, are they ADT service providers as per that definition?
So Cospa Sarsat definitely is. So we've been working with them quite a lot. They've been involved in a lot of the discussions on the development of the ladder and the ADT solutions. We're expecting them obviously to be completely compliant. I understand, and I'll probably throw this over to Sean, but I understand that alert is something different, but they do have a solution which is, I believe, more specifically aimed at the GADSS scenario. So perhaps Sean could take that.
Sean?
Yeah, so in terms of GADSS, there is a commercial solution that Arion operates in conjunction with FlyToWare called Global Beacon. And what they do is they merge the data that you've seen there, the real-time data with some alerting matrices, and provide that information to anybody who registers and pays for the service commercially. However, in terms of Arion Alert, we have worked extensively with ICAO on some of their trials in relation to the GADSS repository, and if we are, what we do is we don't monitor, you query it. So if we get a query coming in from LADAR who wants additional information, we would be more than happy to be able to provide that in any format that we can. As you can see, we present accurate data in a tabular form and also in a KML, and we'd be quite happy to share that data on request with any of the LADAR participants. And I just, again, it's a free service. If anybody wants to register, I'd encourage them to do so. The information is there available if you need it.
Thank you, Sean. Steve, you would want to comment?
I'm not sure there's a whole lot more I can add other than to say that indeed, as Ian mentioned, we've been working very closely with ICAO, with the entire team there, and have had successful tests of populating data into the ladder from basically test data of ELT-DT transmissions. And ELT-DTs themselves are being well tested. So I think we are going to be quite ready come 2023 to comply fully with the GADSS requirements. I guess I'll take this opportunity to mention that Miguel Marin of ICAO caught me in a lie earlier in my slides. I said we'd comply with the 6 nautical mile location requirement of Annex 6. It's actually the 1 minute reporting requirement, which is aligned with a 6 nautical mile location probability, but the actual requirement is for 1 minute reporting. And Cospa Sarsat will report, especially in the first minutes, much more frequently than 1 minute. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. Question for you, Philippe. There was a comment you mentioned in your slides, preventive maintenance, the benefits for preventive maintenance. Can you elaborate on that a little bit, please?
I'm just aware about some work that have been done by the manufacturer to provide maintenance information and TC's agreement with the operators. And I think that this question should be directed to Claude Pichavant or to Boeing, because in fact they will be the one that will explain in fact how it works and what are the benefits. But this is not really a GATT relative function.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. A question, Sean, for you. Have you tested the Arion at land, or is it only at open seas?
So Arion has been tested over land everywhere. I simply put in the ditching ones for the context of this operation, but we have assisted numerous search and rescue organisations, like I say, in Australia, with land-based exercises as well. the data there is just as accurate and just as essential in terms of how they operate. And like I said, you know, whilst we do this as a service, a free of charge service, the other side of the coin is that we do provide commercial data for ANSPs who don't want to use a land-based solution for their surveillance needs. So all this data has been approved by EASA as fit for purpose for both en route and oceanic services as well. So it's as accurate over land as it is over sea.
Thank you for that clear answer. Another question, maybe also for you, Sean, or for Ian. Is it possible to register on a Part 91 flight aircraft, then unregister after a ferry flight?
So I can answer for myself. We don't register specific aircraft. It is the agency that registers. So if someone wants to register as an agency, having said that, they need to be either a service provider, a regulator, an ANSP, or a search and rescue organization. But we would welcome anybody like that registering, and then they have the availability at any time to check up. You know, they don't need to cancel the registration because it's push. We will only be in contact with them if they contact us, and that's the way we operate.
Okay, thank you. Ian, anything to add to that, or no? Thank you. Then, well, on the letter, so I come to you, Ian. There are questions on hosting the letter. Well, there's some positive response to this integration of in the ops database, the ATSU, the operator, and the intention to also refer to the SPOCs. Can you elaborate a little bit on the hosting? Is it intending that ICAO is going to host itself, or what are the characteristics of the final provider to host the letter? Over to you.
Yeah, sure. So we touched on this briefly yesterday, and ICAO intends to retain the kind of high-level policy-making aspects of the ladder. So we discussed a little bit about the need to validate users to make sure that we're not granting access to the system to people who shouldn't have access to it, and that sort of policy-level stuff will remain with ICAO because we feel it's important to have control over that. We're obviously not in a position to host a system which is going to need to be 24/7 operational access. So we will be looking for someone who can do that on a day-to-day kind of admin basis. Now, from our perspective, really, you know, we're still looking at several options as to what that could be. Ideally, you know, some kind of, you know, an international organization would be ideal because, you know, we feel that would get around some of the issues of there being, you know, any territorial aspects to that data, although the system is designed to be able to cope with that if it has to. But it's a complex problem. We're still looking into it. But as I say, the main issues are this split between the kind of operational admin side, which is the passwords and the maintenance and stuff. And that's really what we're looking for now. And we have a few options that we're exploring, but I probably can't go into too much more detail about that at the moment. Thanks.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, I think we are approaching the safe landing of the 3 webinars, which is always nice. Question to the panelists: is there anything you would like to say or to comment upon? Questions that you have seen that require some feedback from you? I see no attempts to take the floor on this. So with that, Sean, Ian, Steve, and Philippe, really would like to thank you for your excellent presentations and contributions during this 3rd and final European GADSS webinar, a series during which we tried to inform you about the GADSS from many perspectives, from a standardization perspective, overall concept perspective, from a regulatory perspective, from an industry perspective in terms of products. And finally, during this webinar, we try to demonstrate how the GADSS will work into practice. So I really would like to thank everyone who has joined us, who has watched all the webinars. As I said at the beginning, the webinars will be available online in the recordings on the EUROCONTROL event page, as will be the presentations. So I would like to thank all the presenters for their presentations during the 3 webinars. I'd like to thank all the people behind the scenes, Jan for the support to these webinars. And with that, I wish you a safe December and a healthy December. And I look forward to seeing you all back in the next year, hopefully soon in person. So thank you for watching and all the best. Bye-bye.